There is a particular kind of quiet that comes right before your whole life changes, and I want you to understand that I heard it before I saw anything. I was standing in my own kitchen with my boots still on, holding a bag of takeout that was going cold in my hand, and I heard my wife laughing in the next room in a way she hadn't laughed with me in years. Low, easy, the kind of laugh you save for someone you've stopped performing for. I didn't walk in right away. I stood there in the doorway of my own house and listened to my wife tell another man that once the shop finally turned a profit, she was gone. Just like that. Gone. And the man laughing back at her was my business partner, the one I'd trusted with the second set of keys to everything I owned. I want to back up, though, because a story like this doesn't start in that kitchen. It starts almost 20 years earlier, in a rented garage with a leaking roof and $200 of tools between us. My name is Thomas Reyes, and for most of my adult life, I believed something simple. If a man puts in honest work, year after year, without cutting corners, life eventually pays him back. I built that belief with my hands, the same way I built everything else. One rebuilt transmission at a time. One satisfied customer at a time. One Saturday, I didn't take off because there was a car on the lift that needed to be ready by Monday. I grew up in a small town 2 hours outside of Denver. The kind of place where everybody knows whose truck is whose just by the sound of the engine turning over. My father ran a 2-bay repair shop out of a converted barn until his heart gave out when I was 26. He didn't leave me much. A set of wrenches. A stack of unpaid invoices he'd been too soft to collect on. And a small, quiet trust his own father had set up decades before, tied up in land none of us ever talked about, because talking about money never felt like something men in my family did. I met Claire the year after my father passed. She was working the front counter at a parts supply store, and she had this way of looking at you like she'd already decided you were going to matter to her life. I liked that about her. I liked it for a long time. We got married in a small ceremony behind the Methodist church on Route 9, with folding chairs borrowed from the fire hall and a cake her aunt made in her own kitchen. We didn't have money for anything else, and it didn't matter one bit. I remember thinking, standing there in a suit that didn't quite fit, that I had never been happier with less. The shop grew slowly. Too slowly some years. I turned down work I couldn't do right rather than take shortcuts that would come back on me later. I turned down a contract early on with a regional trucking company because it would have meant 6 months away from home, and Claire cried at our kitchen table and said she didn't want to raise a marriage over the phone. I didn't think twice. I said no to the money and yes to her. Somewhere around year 12, I brought on a partner. His name was Ray Doss, a sharp, likable guy I'd known since high school, good with numbers in a way I never was. I gave him 30% of the business and full access to the accounts, because that's what you do with someone you trust. I never once imagined I'd need to check up on him. The slow burn of this story, if I'm honest with you, started almost 2 years before that night in the kitchen. Small things. Claire started taking longer showers before she left for the shop's front office, where she helped with scheduling 3 days a week. She started asking about the business in a different way, not what are we building, but what is it actually worth right now. She'd go quiet whenever I mentioned expansion plans, the same quiet a person gets when they're doing math in their head they don't want you to see. I noticed Ray staying later some evenings, long after the last customer had picked up their car. I noticed he'd stopped inviting me to grab a beer after close the way he used to. I told myself it was nothing. Men get busy. Marriages go through quiet seasons. I had built my whole adult life on giving people the benefit of the doubt, and I wasn't ready to stop just because a few small things didn't add up the way they used to. The catalyst came on an ordinary Tuesday. I'd closed the shop early because a supplier delivery got delayed, and I decided to surprise Claire with dinner from the Thai place she liked on 5th Street. I remember standing in the driveway for a second before I went in, noticing that Ray's truck was parked 2 houses down instead of in front of ours, tucked behind a neighbor's hedge like it had been placed there on purpose. I didn't think much of it. I walked in through the side door the way I always did, and that's when I heard them. Claire's voice, low and certain, floating out from the living room. Once the shop turns that county contract into real profit, I'm done playing house with a man who thinks a rebuilt engine is a personality. I'll take my half and disappear before he even knows what hit him. And Ray, laughing softly, saying something about how patient she'd been, how it would all be worth it soon. I didn't storm in. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy to tell you I felt some surge of rage and threw the door open. That's not what happened. What happened is that everything in me went very still, the way a lake goes still right before it freezes over. I stood in that hallway holding a bag of pad CEW that was starting to soak through at the bottom, and I understood, all at once, that the last several years of my marriage had been a performance. I was the only one who didn't know he was watching. I set the food down quietly on the hall table. I walked back out the side door. I got in my truck and drove. I ended up at the reservoir outside of town, the same spot I used to go as a teenager when I needed to think without anyone talking to me. I sat there with the engine off until the cold worked its way into the cab, and somewhere in that stillness, for the first time in months, my mind went clear instead of foggy. I opened the business banking app on my phone, more out of habit than any real plan, and started scrolling. That's when I found the pattern I'd been too trusting to notice. Over the past 14 months, Ray had been moving money out of a supplier account we rarely touched, small enough each time that it never triggered a flag, large enough in total that it came to just over $41,000. Every transfer led back to a personal account. His. I kept scrolling, and an old text thread surfaced. One Claire had sent to her sister nearly 2 years before, synced automatically to a shared family cloud account we'd set up back when we still shared everything without thinking twice about it. The message was short. Once the shop is actually worth something, I'm out. I didn't marry a man, I married a garage. 2 years. She had started planning her exit 2 years earlier, right around the time the business finally turned its first real profit. 2 years of anniversary dinners. 2 years of her asking how my day went while already knowing she didn't plan to be there for many more of them. I called my mother that night. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, like she'd been half expecting the call. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. She told me to come by in the morning, and that whatever I decided to do, I needed to decide it with a clear head and not an angry one. I also called my cousin Danny, a contract attorney who'd helped me set up the business structure years earlier. He went quiet for a long moment when I told him what I'd found, and then he admitted something that landed harder than anything Claire or Ray had done. He said he'd noticed the pattern in the books almost a year earlier during a routine review, and he hadn't said anything because he didn't want to blow up my marriage over what he thought might just be a bad month. He said he should have trusted his gut instead of his doubt. I told him I understood. I meant it mostly, but it still hurt to learn that even the people closest to me had chosen silence over telling me the truth. I spent the rest of that week gathering everything, quietly and without a single confrontation. Bank statements, the old message thread, a separate email folder where I found, tucked away as a draft, a nearly finished agreement between Claire and a lawyer 2 towns over, dated 8 months earlier, outlining how the marital assets from the business would be split once she filed. She hadn't been thinking about leaving. She had already decided to leave. She was simply waiting for the number to get bigger first. What neither of them knew, because I had never seen a reason to mention it, was that the land my father left me, the same land that trust had been quietly built on for 2 generations before him, had appreciated enough over the years to fund the shop's expansion entirely on its own. The county contract Claire was so eager to cash out on wasn't even the real asset. It never had been. There was one event left on the calendar that season that neither of them would dare miss. The shop's 20th anniversary open house, held at the community center downtown, the kind of night the whole town showed up for because half of them had a car I'd fixed at some point over 2 decades. I asked my cousin Danny to help me put together a short presentation, the kind any small business owner might give to thank the community. I didn't tell him everything I planned to say. I didn't need to. The night of the open house, the community center was strung with string lights and folding tables covered in the aunt's recipe kind of potluck dishes small towns are built on. Claire arrived on Ray's arm, not even trying to hide it anymore, introducing him to old customers as her real partner now, in the shop and otherwise. Nobody in that room yet understood the sentence the way I did. I stood near the back for most of the evening, in a plain collared shirt, nursing a glass of water I never finished, watching the night unfold exactly the way I expected it would. When it came time for my remarks, I walked up slowly, the same unhurried walk I used crossing any job site I'd ever worked. The room quieted the way rooms do for someone they respect. I thanked everyone for 20 years of trust. I told them about my father's leaking roof garage and the $200 of tools we started with. Then I told them, calmly, That for the past 3 years I had been quietly funding trade school scholarships for 11 kids from 3 counties over who couldn't otherwise afford to become mechanics, welders, electricians. I'd never put my name on a single one of those checks, because that had never been the point. A woman near the second table stood halfway out of her seat, her hand over her mouth. One of those 11 kids, now finishing her second year of trade school, hearing for the first time who had made it possible. Then I said there was one more thing the room deserved to hear. I told them, without raising my voice, that I'd recently learned some hard truths about loyalty, the kind you don't expect to have to learn twice in one lifetime. I played the message from Claire's own phone, the one she'd sent her sister nearly 2 years earlier. Once the shop is actually worth something, I'm out. I didn't marry a man, I married a garage. The room went completely silent, and then it didn't. Claire's face drained of color in front of everyone she had spent years trying to impress. Ray leaned toward her and asked, not quietly enough, if the money he'd been quietly withdrawing had really gone toward the wedding she told him they were secretly planning together, or somewhere else entirely. That was the second secret coming apart in under 2 minutes, and there was no saving the rest of the evening after that. Claire stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Thomas, don't do this," she said, her voice cracking, all the polish gone out of it. "Everything you have because I stood by you through the hard years." I looked at her from where I stood and told her, without a trace of anger in my voice, that I remembered every one of those years clearly, including the ones where she'd already decided to leave and simply hadn't told me yet. I told her I wasn't angry that she wanted more for her life. I was only sorry she never once thought I deserved the truth about it. She didn't have an answer for that. Nobody in that room did. I set the microphone down gently, and I walked back through the crowd toward the exit, past people who parted from me without a word, past Ray who wouldn't meet my eyes, past Claire, standing frozen with one hand pressed flat to her chest like she could hold her own composure in place by force. Outside, the night air was sharp enough to clear my head completely, and for the first time in weeks, I breathed easy. I didn't go home that night. I drove out to my mother's place instead, and we sat at her kitchen table while she made coffee without needing to be asked. I told her everything, start to finish, in a voice that never once rose above the sound of the coffee maker. She listened all the way through, and when I finished, she only said that my father used to tell her the loudest man in the room is rarely the most dangerous one in it. I've carried that with me since. Claire tried reaching me several times over the following weeks. A voicemail here, a text there, each one a little more desperate than the last. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing left unsaid between us that hadn't already been said in front of the whole town. The divorce settlement, once her attorney realized how little leverage remained, moved quickly and without much of a fight. Ray was let go from the business the following week, and word travels fast in a small town, especially the kind of word about a man who quietly drains accounts that aren't his. He didn't stay in town much longer after that. I didn't move back into the house we'd shared. I sold it, and I bought a smaller place near the shop instead, close enough to walk to work most mornings. I sat down with Danny and my mother on a gray Tuesday afternoon and made a decision I'd been quietly working toward since the night of the open house. I restructured the business, folding the majority of its future profits into a scholarship fund built to run independently of my name, expanding the 11 kids I'd already been helping into what I hoped would eventually be dozens more. My mother asked me when I decided all this. I told her it was the night I found the draft of the divorce agreement, the night I understood that holding on to everything Claire and Ray assumed I'd fight hardest to keep wasn't actually the same thing as holding on to who I was. These days, I spend most of my mornings in the same shop my father started, with a corkboard slowly filling up with photographs of kids the fund has helped get their first set of tools, their first apprenticeship, their first paycheck that didn't feel like survival. There's an old photograph on my desk of Claire and me, 5 years into the marriage, laughing at something the camera never caught. I look at it some mornings. Then I set it face down, gently, not out of anger anymore, just the simple understanding that some chapters are meant to close quietly, without ceremony. I still call my mother most Sundays. She still complains about her old vacuum cleaner. I still laugh harder than the joke deserves, mostly because it's good, plain, ordinary laughter, the kind I'd nearly forgotten I was capable of. There's no leftover anger in me now. No ache from being betrayed by people who ate dinner at my table for years. What used to sit in my chest like a stone has settled, slowly, into something closer to stillness. I didn't win by ruining Claire or Ray in front of the whole town, though I could have gone further than I did, and I think everyone in that room would have understood if I had. I won by walking away from the exact things they assumed I'd fight hardest to keep, and using what was left to build something bigger than any one person's pride. If there's anything I'd want you to take from this, it isn't a lesson about revenge. It's something quieter than that. If you suspect someone in your life isn't telling you the whole truth, don't wait for a room full of strangers to find out for you. Start paying attention to the small things now, the ones that don't add up. Keep your own records. Talk to your own attorney before you sign anything, not after. And if the day ever comes when you finally learn the truth, you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay steady. Say what's true once, clearly, and then simply walk toward whatever comes next. Silence was never weakness in my life. It was how I chose, in my own time, to finally be heard. And real victory, I've come to understand, was never about holding on to everything. It was about knowing exactly when to let go, and who was still standing close enough afterward to help me carry what was left.